The wind tore across the frozen plains of Zephyria, carrying with it shards of ice that stung Cale Mercer's face. He tightened his hood and braced against the storm, his boots sinking into the thick, powdery snow with every step. Zephyria was a planet of extremes. Towering ice cliffs rose like frozen giants, their surfaces glinting faintly in the dim light of the distant sun. The storm had come suddenly, faster than any prediction Kyle had made, and it was merciless. Kyle's small shelter was only a few meters away. Its walls, made of layered composites designed to withstand the brutal cold, shivered under the pressure of the howling wind. Inside, heaters hummed steadily, keeping the temperature just above freezing. He had been alone here for weeks, gathering samples and recording the planet's unusual weather patterns. Zephyria was supposed to be uninhabited, a perfect laboratory for extreme conditions. Yet today, Cale felt a strange unease, a hint that something was out there hidden in the storm. He reached the shelter's door and struggled to slide the thick latch open. Snow and ice clung stubbornly to the frame, but finally he stepped inside. The warmth hit him like a wave, and he exhaled in relief. The storm was growing louder, pounding against the walls, rattling the metal frame. Cale quickly moved to the control panel, checking the storm sensors. They flashed red. This was not a normal weather pattern. The winds were unpredictable, the snow swirling faster than he had ever seen. Survival outside would be impossible for any unprepared life form. Cale sank into his chair and rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them. He had just begun recalibrating the sensors when he noticed something unusual on the screen. Footprints, or something like footprints, were moving across the snow outside. They were large and humanoid in shape, but the stride and spacing were unlike any human. Cale frowned. He had expected no life here. No humans, no animals, nothing. Yet the tracker clearly indicated movement heading straight for his shelter. The wind roared against the metal walls, and Cale's heart began to race. Whoever or whatever was out there could not survive the storm for long without shelter. His instincts told him to stay hidden, but curiosity and a sense of responsibility pushed him toward the door. He grabbed his thermal visor and carefully stepped outside. The snow whipped at him, stinging his face, but he caught sight of a figure moving clumsily through the drifts. It was tall, taller than a human, with long limbs that seemed almost fragile in the heavy snow. Its skin glimmered faintly under the dim light, semi-transparent in a way that made Cale squint. Blue and green bioluminescent markings ran across its body in intricate patterns, pulsing faintly with every movement. The being froze as it noticed Cale, its glowing eyes wide with shock and fear. Cale took a slow step forward, raising his hands in a universal gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I won't hurt you." The creature shivered, backing a step, then another. Its mouth opened in what Cale guessed was a sound of confusion or warning. Cale could not understand the words if there were words. He slowly removed his gloves, letting his hands show empty and harmless. The alien's glowing eyes flickered, uncertain, torn between fear and desperation. The storm howled louder, pushing both Cale and the alien toward a simple truth. Survival mattered more than fear. Cale reached for the door, gesturing for the creature to follow. After a tense moment, the alien hesitated, then cautiously stepped inside. The door closed behind it, sealing the violent storm outside. Inside, Cale guided the being toward a heated area. He offered a blanket, placing it gently on the floor. The alien lowered its head, shivering, but did not resist. Cale moved to the storage unit and grabbed a small supply of nutrient packs, offering one. The alien touched it with a delicate hand, sniffed it, and then accepted it, slowly eating. Cale studied it carefully. Its body was humanoid, yet alien in every detail. The glowing patterns on its skin were mesmerizing, and they seemed to respond to the warmth and movement around it. He tried to mimic its gestures, pointing to himself and saying, "Kyle," then gesturing to the alien, "You?" The alien tilted its head, then touched its chest lightly, making a sound Cale could not interpret. For several minutes, they simply observed each other. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small shelter, a fragile trust began to form. Cale could feel his heart pounding. He had expected loneliness here, perhaps some small animal or nothing at all. But now he was face to face with an intelligent being whose survival depended on him as much as his depended on the shelter. "I'm going to call you Elira," Cale said finally, settling on a name that felt natural to him. The alien froze at first, then seemed to respond positively, tilting its head and making a softer sound. Kale smiled, a small victory in a moment that could easily have turned dangerous. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Kale knew they would have to stay inside for days, possibly a week. He led Alira to a small workstation where he began to heat water and prepare more nutrients. The alien watched carefully, fascinated by the tools and devices. Kyle explained each one slowly, using gestures demonstrating how they worked. Elira's eyes followed every movement, glowing faintly brighter in curiosity. As the hours passed, the alien slowly relaxed. It moved closer to the heater, feeling the warmth on its skin. Kale monitored the storm outside, realizing it would not be safe to leave for a long while. He decided to use this time wisely. He began drawing on a tablet, simple sketches showing his environment, the storm, and survival techniques. Elira watched intently, then began to mimic the drawings with its own glowing patterns, creating simple pictograms. It became clear that while words were useless, communication was possible. They began to exchange information, Kyle showing how to use basic tools, Elira sharing gestures that indicated how it had survived previous storms. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a slow understanding forming without language. Kale felt a warmth he had not expected, a sense of companionship that made the harsh world outside seem slightly less threatening. Night fell outside, though on Zephyria, night was not like Earth. The storm made the sky a swirling gray, broken only by flashes of distant lightning reflected on the ice cliffs. Inside the shelter, the temperature was steady, and Kyle watched as Elira finally lay down on the blanket. Its breathing slowed, and the faint pulsing of its bioluminescent markings softened. Kale settled into his own bunk, still alert, still listening to the storm, but now with a strange feeling of hope. He realized, as he drifted toward a light sleep, that survival here would not be easy. Zephyria was unforgiving, and this being so different from him had no place to go but into the storm or into his care. And yet, there was something extraordinary in this moment. He was not alone, and for the first time on this frozen planet he felt that human ingenuity, empathy, and resilience could make a difference. Tomorrow, he would need to find ways to understand Elira better. He would need to teach survival techniques and learn from her. But tonight survival was simple: warmth, food, and trust. The storm could rage as it liked. Inside the small shelter, two beings, human and alien, had found a fragile alliance against the universe's harshness. Kale closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm of Elira's breathing and the hum of the heaters. Out there, the storm was relentless, but inside, a new story was beginning, one that neither human nor alien could have predicted, and so, with the wind screaming outside and the snow piling against the walls, Kale, Mercer, and Elira began the first chapter of a partnership that would test their limits, their courage, and the very essence of what it meant to survive. The storm outside continued to rage, a relentless wall of snow and wind that battered the shelter's reinforced walls. Inside, Kale Mercer moved carefully, making sure the alien Elira was comfortable. She sat near the heater, her glowing patterns dim and soft, watching him with large, curious eyes. Though she had accepted the shelter and warmth, fear still lingered in her posture. Kale knew that to survive together, he would need to earn her trust completely. He began with small gestures. He took a chair and moved closer, sitting a respectful distance away. He held out his hand, palm open, and smiled. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. The alien flinched slightly but did not move back. Kale repeated the gesture several times, pairing it with simple movements, pointing to himself, saying his name, then pointing to her, asking her name. Elira responded by touching her chest, a faint glow pulsing brighter with each touch. Kale nodded. "Elira," he said. It seemed she had accepted the name he had given her. Kale decided that communication would be their next step. Words were useless. Their voices did not match, and their languages were completely different. Instead, he picked up a tablet and began to draw simple sketches. He drew the shelter first, then himself, then a figure like hers. Elira watched intently, tilting her head and touching the glowing patterns on her arms. Then, using a glowing stylus she produced from her belongings, she began to draw shapes and lines that seemed to tell a story. The first drawings were simple: a stick figure struggling in the snow, waves of wind, and a symbol that Kyle interpreted as shelter. She drew quickly, her glowing patterns pulsing as she worked. Kale realized she was trying to explain how she had survived before finding him. He smiled, impressed. Even in fear, she was clever and resourceful. Kale picked up a small model of a snow anchor he had made earlier. He demonstrated how it worked, dropping it into a patch of snow near the door and showing how it held the structure against strong winds. Illyra watched carefully, her eyes wide. Then with delicate hands she tried it herself, repeating his movements. The anchor wobbled at first, then held firm. Kale clapped softly, and Illyra's patterns pulsed brightly, a sign of joy and approval. It was clear that Illyra's species valued knowledge and observation. She learned quickly, absorbing every movement Kale made. He realized that humans had an advantage here, creativity and the ability to improvise. He could make something out of almost nothing, while she relied on precision and training. Together they had the potential to survive anything this frozen world could throw at them. Hours passed, and Kale noticed Illyra beginning to relax. Her movements were smoother, less tense. She explored the shelter carefully, touching the walls, inspecting the heater, and watching the small monitors. Kale showed her how to operate the water heater and how to open the nutrient pack safely. Each small lesson brought a quiet excitement to her glowing patterns. She even tried to mimic his gestures, pointing to herself and touching her chest, repeating the motion he used to say his name. Night came slowly on Zephyria, though the storm made the sky a swirling gray canvas. Outside, snow swirled like a living creature, but inside, the shelter became a small world of learning and connection. Kale decided to use the time to teach Illyra more than just survival. He began explaining basic weather patterns, drawing simple diagrams of wind currents, snowdrifts, and the way storms formed on this planet. Illyra watched, her glowing patterns flickering with interest. Then in response, she drew shapes that Kale interpreted as storm warnings her species had learned from previous travels. The exchange of knowledge built more than understanding. It built trust. Kale realized that fear was not gone, but it was replaced by curiosity. Illyra wanted to learn from him, and Kale wanted to learn from her. They were no longer just two beings trapped in a storm. They were partners, working together to understand a world that neither had fully mastered. As the storm raged on, Kyle noticed a subtle change in Illyra's behavior. She began moving closer to him during breaks, sitting near the warmth of the heater and watching him with an intensity that suggested deep thought. She did not speak, but the glow of her pattern seemed to communicate emotions Kale could only guess at: wonder, respect, and perhaps even a small spark of trust. He smiled softly to himself. Humans had a way of forming bonds quickly, even with those who had never met them before. Kale decided to test Illyra's reaction to tools. He picked up a small multi-tool, showing how to use the different functions. Illyra reached out with delicate fingers, handling the tool carefully. She turned it in her hands, examined each feature, then mimicked his demonstration with surprising precision. Kale laughed quietly. "You're smarter than I thought," he said. She tilted her head as if amused, and a soft pulse of light ran across her arms, a signal Kale interpreted as agreement. They spent the next few hours working together on small projects inside the shelter. Kale showed her how to secure supplies, organize the limited storage space, and create small markers to track changes in the storm. Illyra responded with her own methods, using gestures and glowing patterns to suggest improvements. Kale was amazed. Her species had an advanced way of thinking, and while their methods were different from his, they complemented each other perfectly. By midnight, the storm had not lessened, but the shelter felt less like a cage and more like a home. Illyra lay down on her blanket, curling slightly as the heater's warmth spread across her body. Kale observed her, realizing that even in an alien form, she shared many basic instincts with humans: the need for warmth, the need for food, and the need for safety. Kyle prepared a small hot meal for himself, eating slowly while keeping an eye on her. He noticed that she occasionally mimicked his eating motions, touching the nutrient pack to her mouth, trying small bites. It was clumsy but deliberate, and Kale admired her persistence. Survival required learning, and she was determined not to fail. He decided to share a small story with her, not in words but in drawings. He sketched a simple scene of a human facing a storm, finding shelter and surviving. Illyra watched intently, then responded with her own drawings. A being in a storm, finding a warm place, and smiling with relief. Kale nodded. They had created a silent story together, a bridge between two worlds. As dawn approached, the storm showed no sign of stopping, but the first part of their day had changed both of them. Kale understood that humans were uniquely capable of adapting to the unknown, using creativity, empathy, and courage to survive. Elira had begun to see him not as a threat, but as a partner, someone whose mind worked in ways that her species did not fully comprehend. Kale made a small note in his journal. Elira is learning quickly. Mutual trust is possible. Our combined skills may allow survival even in the worst conditions. Humans can adapt in ways that are unpredictable, and this seems to impress her. He paused, reflecting. This was not just survival. It was the beginning of understanding between species, a rare and valuable connection. By mid-morning, Kyle and Elira had settled into a rhythm. He demonstrated simple mechanical repairs on the shelter walls damaged by the storm, and Elira assisted with precision. Together, they reinforced the structure, working silently but efficiently. Each success built confidence, each shared task built trust. Kyle could see that she was beginning to rely on him, not just for warmth or safety, but for guidance. When they finally paused to rest, Kale offered Elira a small gesture of comfort, a soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She accepted it carefully, glancing up at him with glowing eyes that reflected both gratitude and curiosity. Kale smiled. "We'll get through this," he said. She responded with a soft hum, a sound that seemed to carry understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the fragile beings inside the shelter. But within, a bond was forming, one built on trust, learning, and shared survival. Kale knew that the days ahead would be difficult. The storm was only the beginning. Yet for the first time since arriving on Zephyria, he felt hope. Humans were not the strongest nor the fastest, but they were clever, adaptable, and capable of forming connections that even alien beings could recognize and respect. And Elira, once terrified at the sight of a human, was beginning to understand something new. That humans, though different, could be allies, teachers, and companions in a universe that often seemed cold and hostile. As the shelter hummed with warmth and life, Kale and Elira rested, preparing for the challenges that the storm and the strange planet would bring next. Together, they had begun a journey that neither could have predicted, one that would test their courage, intelligence, and the very essence of trust between two very different worlds. The storm continued its furious dance across the frozen plains of Zephyria, but inside the small shelter, Kale, Mercer, and Elira had settled into a careful routine. Kale had spent the first 2 days teaching Elira basic survival techniques, how to use the shelter's heat system, how to ration nutrient packs, and how to secure the structure against the planet's violent winds. In turn, Elira had shared her own knowledge, using gestures and glowing patterns to show Kale ways to detect subtle changes in the storm, techniques her people used on other harsh planets. By the 3rd day, the wind had lessened slightly. Not enough to venture far, but enough to consider exploring nearby ice caves Kale had noticed, while surveying the area from the shelter's small observation point. He looked at Elira, who was busy carefully arranging small instruments she had brought with her. Her glowing patterns flickered softly as if reflecting her curiosity. "I think the storm is slowing," Kale said, pointing toward the faint light beyond the shelter. "We should explore the caves. There might be something useful, or something we need to know about the planet." Elira tilted her head, her glowing patterns pulsing with anticipation. She stepped closer, letting Kyle guide her toward the shelter's reinforced entrance. The snow outside was still deep, but with careful steps and their combined strength, they moved through the drifts. Kale noticed that Elira adapted quickly, her long limbs moving gracefully through the thick snow, following his lead. The ice caves were not far, but the path was treacherous. Hidden ice ridges and sudden drops made each step risky. Kale used a small climbing tool to anchor himself, demonstrating its use to Elira. She mimicked him, testing the tool with precision. Kale felt a surge of admiration. Her species might be physically different, but her intelligence and ability to learn were exceptional. As they entered the first cave, a soft blue light reflected from the ice walls, illuminating strange, crystalline formations. The air inside was surprisingly still and cold, the storm's roar outside replaced by a low echo. Elira moved carefully, touching the walls with delicate hands, her glowing markings brightening as if reacting to the minerals around her. Kyle watched in fascination. She was not just curious. She was studying the environment, noting details that he might have missed. The deeper they went, the more unusual the cave became. Kale noticed strange machinery embedded in the ice. Ancient panels, long frozen, hummed faintly, almost as if powered by some residual energy. Illyra's eyes widened and her glow pulsed rapidly. She approached the panels, tracing lines with her fingers and producing a series of soft sounds. Kale could not understand the sounds, but the urgency and excitement in her tone were clear. "Do you know what this is?" Kale asked. He crouched near one of the panels, brushing snow off the frozen surface. Strange symbols similar to the patterns on Illyra's skin were etched into the metal. Kale's mind raced. This was evidence of a civilization that had survived on Zephyria long before humans or Illyra's people had arrived. Illyra nodded rapidly, her hands moving over the symbols. Kale tried to mimic her gestures, pointing to symbols and matching them with words he knew. Slowly, he realized that these panels were some form of data storage, perhaps used by explorers to track weather patterns, resources, or other life forms on the planet. The thought excited Kale. If they could understand this technology, survival on Zephyria would become far easier. He began working methodically, using a small heat device to gently melt ice covering some panels. Illyra assisted, her hands steady and precise. They worked together, a team united by curiosity and survival. Kale was impressed by her ability to adapt quickly to human tools and ideas, while Illyra seemed equally fascinated by the simplicity and creativity of Kale's methods. Hours passed as they explored the cave system. Kale recorded every finding on his tablet, making sketches and notes. Illyra traced patterns with glowing lines in the air, creating a visual map that complemented his notes. They discovered several chambers, some containing small mechanical devices frozen in ice, others holding minerals that seemed valuable for future technology. At one point, Kale paused, studying a small device that resembled a weather scanner. He activated it carefully, and a holographic projection flickered to life, showing swirling wind patterns and storm trajectories. Illyra's eyes widened in surprise. She had seen advanced technology before, but this simple human device, enhanced by his improvisation, seemed almost magical to her. "You see," Kale said gently, "humans can adapt. We can take simple tools and make them do things we need." Illyra tilted her head, glowing patterns slowly pulsing in understanding. She extended her hand toward the device, touching the holographic winds with curiosity. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Here was a human, alone on a frozen planet using his mind to survive, and the alien recognized his ingenuity. They continued deeper into the cave, and Kale noticed a narrow passage partially blocked by ice. Using his multi-tool, he carefully chipped away the ice, creating a small opening. Illyra helped, using her hands and strength to clear the rest. On the other side, they found a vast chamber, walls lined with strange crystals and remnants of machinery. Kale's breath caught in his throat. This was a hidden library of survival, a place that contained knowledge that could explain much about Zephyria's harsh climate. Illyra moved through the chamber, touching crystals and panels with reverence. Kale followed, documenting every detail. He realized that while her species had advanced technology, humans had a unique way of improvising and understanding their environment intuitively. His ability to think creatively, to combine observation with practical action, was something Illyra seemed to admire deeply. As they explored, Kale accidentally triggered a small device. It emitted a soft hum and projected a holographic map of the planet, highlighting regions of extreme storms, ice cliffs, and hidden caves. Illyra gasped, glowing brighter than ever. She touched the map, pointing to regions she recognized, then gesturing toward Kyle in a way that clearly said, "You understand this too." Kyle nodded, feeling a sense of pride. He had never felt so connected to another being, especially one so different. They were learning from each other, not just surviving together. And in that moment, Kale realized something important. Humans had an advantage that no amount of technology could replace. The ability to think creatively, adapt to unknown situations, and work with others, even aliens, was what made survival possible. They spent the rest of the day in the cave, examining every panel, every crystal, and every device. Kale found a set of records indicating that previous explorers had survived for months in the storm-prone regions. Illyra interpreted the symbols quickly, and together they pieced together patterns of the planet's weather. Cale added his own observations, creating a combined knowledge base that neither species could have made alone. By late evening, the storm outside had lessened considerably. The wind still howled, but the snow fell more gently. Cale and Illyra decided it was time to return to the shelter. They retraced their steps through the icy passages, careful not to disturb the fragile crystals or hidden machinery. Illyra moved with confidence now, her fear replaced by curiosity and trust. When they finally emerged from the cave, the frozen landscape of Zephyria stretched before them. Snow-covered cliffs glistened under the pale light, and the wind carried the faint scent of minerals from the caves. Cale looked at Illyra and smiled. She returned the gesture in her own way, her glowing patterns forming a soft, flowing wave of light. It was their way of saying, "We did this together." Back at the shelter, Cale reviewed the day's discoveries. He documented everything carefully, making sketches, notes, and diagrams. Illyra assisted, using her glowing patterns to mark points of interest. Together, they had learned more about Zephyria in one day than Cale could have imagined when he first arrived. As night fell, Cale reflected on what he had learned, not just about the planet but about himself and humanity. Humans might not be the strongest or the fastest, but they were adaptable, clever, and capable of forming connections that transcended species. Illyra's respect and trust were proof of that. Survival was not just about endurance. It was about ingenuity, cooperation, and understanding. Illyra curled near the heater, her patterns dimming as she settled into rest. Cale watched her for a moment, then returned to his notes. He felt a deep sense of purpose. This planet was harsh, unforgiving, but together, human and alien could survive, and perhaps in their collaboration, they could uncover secrets that no one had discovered before. Tomorrow, he decided, they would explore further. There were more caves, more machinery, and perhaps more evidence of the planet's ancient inhabitants. But tonight, Cale allowed himself a quiet satisfaction. They had survived the storm together, learned from each other, and begun to build something far greater than mere survival: trust, understanding, and the beginning of a bond between worlds. For the first time since arriving on Zephyria, Cale felt truly optimistic. Humans had a way of thriving where others might fail, not through raw power but through intelligence, creativity, and heart. And Illyra, once terrified at the sight of a human, now stood beside him not as a stranger but as a companion, ready to face the unknown together. The storm had faded, leaving behind a frozen world glistening under Zephyria's pale sun. The winds were calmer, but the snowdrifts remained deep and treacherous. Cale Mercer stepped outside the shelter cautiously, scanning the icy plains. He felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Survival was no longer about battling the storm. Now, it was about what might be moving quietly across the frozen landscape. Illyra followed closely, her glowing patterns flickering in the weak sunlight. She moved gracefully, but her eyes were alert, scanning every shadow. The days in the shelter had built trust between them, but both knew the planet was full of unknown dangers. Cale had learned to read the subtle signs of movement: footprints in the snow, disturbed ice formations, and the faint noises carried on the wind. He had seen nothing yet, but he sensed that danger was near. They decided to explore a nearby ridge that overlooked a valley filled with jagged ice formations. Cale wanted to understand the terrain better, and Illyra seemed eager to show him her species' methods for sensing the environment. As they climbed, Cale noticed strange tracks in the snow. They were wide, clawed, and unlike anything he had seen before. Illyra's eyes widened, and she pointed to the tracks, then to the ridge. He understood immediately. They were being hunted, or at least observed. Cale crouched, studying the tracks carefully. "They're predators," he said softly. "We need to be careful." Illyra nodded, her glowing patterns pulsing faster, a clear sign of alertness and concern. Cale led the way down the ridge, choosing a path that offered cover behind ice formations. They moved silently, each step measured and deliberate. The valley was a maze of towering ice spires, deep crevices, and hidden ledges. Cale realized that the predators were likely using the terrain to their advantage, moving unseen while keeping them in sight. He gestured to Illyra to stay low and follow his lead. Together they navigated the icy labyrinth, using hand signals and subtle movements to communicate. Kyle's mind raced. He needed a plan that combined both human ingenuity and Illyra's unique abilities. He studied the ice formations, noting weak points and areas that could be used to create barriers or traps. Illyra watched him closely, her glowing patterns flickering as if she were calculating possibilities. Then she reached into her bag and produced a small device, a sensor that could detect movement through vibrations in the ice. Kale was impressed. Her species' technology was advanced, but he knew how to use it in ways even she hadn't thought of. They set up a simple alarm system using both their skills. Kyle used pieces of debris and metal to create noise traps, while Illyra placed her sensors to detect vibrations from approaching predators. They tested the system carefully, watching as snow shifted and small cracks formed in the ice under their improvised alarms. When a small predator triggered the trap, they saw it flee, startled. Kale grinned. "Not bad for a first try," he said. Illyra responded with a soft hum, her glow pulsing brightly. The real test came later that afternoon. The ground trembled slightly, a deep vibration that Kale recognized as far larger than the small creature they had tested. He signaled to Illyra, pointing to a nearby cluster of ice formations. Together they hid behind the sharp spires, peering out at the source of the movement. A massive predator emerged, a creature at least twice the height of a human, covered in thick fur and scales with glowing eyes that reflected the sunlight. Its claws dug into the snow, leaving deep gouges in the frozen ground. Kyle's heart raced, but he remained calm. He had to think fast. Illyra crouched beside him, her patterns pulsing in rapid sequences, likely communicating her analysis. Kale nodded. They would need to act together. He whispered a plan to Illyra using gestures and simple sounds. She understood immediately. Kale set off a small noise trap in one direction, drawing the predator's attention. The creature snarled, its glowing eyes locking on the moving object. Illyra then triggered a vibration sensor in another direction, creating confusion. The predator roared, its movements jerky as it tried to understand the sudden signals. Kale and Illyra moved silently, closing the distance while the creature was distracted. They had chosen a narrow passage between two ice cliffs, forcing the predator to approach from a confined space. Kale picked up a small, weighted ice shard and hurled it strategically, striking a weak section of ice above the predator. The ice collapsed, blocking its path temporarily and giving them time to escape. Illyra's glowing patterns flickered in excitement. She moved gracefully, using her species' ability to detect subtle vibrations to guide Kyle to safer ground. Together, they reached a small overhang hidden from view. Kale exhaled deeply. "That was close," he said. Illyra touched his shoulder lightly, a gesture that Kale understood as both acknowledgement and thanks. For the rest of the day, they worked together to secure their path through the valley. Kale used his knowledge of engineering and physics to create makeshift barriers and alarms, while Illyra's senses and technology provided guidance and insight. They discovered a small cave system that offered a temporary refuge from the predators and the remaining cold winds. Inside, they rested, sharing nutrient packs and reviewing their plan for the next day. Kyle observed Illyra closely. Her species was impressive, intelligent, precise, and quick to adapt, but he realized that humans had an edge in creativity and improvisation. He had used nothing more than basic materials and knowledge to manipulate the environment, creating solutions that even advanced technology could not achieve alone. Illyra's respect for him was evident in the way her glowing patterns pulsed gently, a silent acknowledgement of human ingenuity. As night fell, they kept watch from the cave. The valley below was dark and silent, but Cal knew the predators were still near. He and Illyra took turns monitoring the area, their senses complementing each other. Kale relied on sight and hearing, while Illyra used her vibrations and subtle signals. Together they formed an effective team, a combination of human adaptability and alien precision. During a quiet moment, Kyle tried another method of communication. He sketched on his tablet, drawing simple maps and symbols that represented their current location, potential predator routes, and safe paths through the valley. Illyra watched intently, then began to draw her own symbols, enhancing his maps with details he had not considered. He realized that their combined knowledge was already greater than either alone. Kale smiled. "We're learning from each other," he said softly. Illyra's glow brightened and she made a sound that Kale interpreted as agreement. They were not just surviving. They were becoming a team. And in the harsh world of Zephyria, that was more important than anything else. The night passed with little incident. Kale and Illyra maintained a careful watch, using their combined skills to detect any movement. The predators prowled the valley, but the traps and barriers they had set kept them at bay. Kale marveled at how quickly Illyra had adapted to human methods, while he had also learned from her technology and instincts. Together they had turned a dangerous situation into an opportunity for growth and cooperation. By morning the valley was calm, and the sun reflected off the ice in dazzling patterns. Kale and Illyra emerged from the cave, cautiously exploring the area. They found evidence of past inhabitants, strange machines buried in the ice, perhaps remnants of a civilization that had survived in ways they could only guess. Kale's curiosity surged. He had survived storms and predators, but now the mysteries of the planet beckoned. Illyra's eyes glowed brightly as she gestured toward the machines. Kale nodded, understanding that they would need to investigate carefully. Together, they approached the remnants, aware that survival was not just about escaping danger, but also about understanding the world they had been dropped into. Kale realized something profound. Humans were not the strongest in a physical sense, nor the most technologically advanced. But their ingenuity, creativity, and ability to combine knowledge in unexpected ways allowed them to survive and even thrive where others could not. Illyra, despite her advanced senses and technology, had already begun to recognize this. Her trust in him had grown, and their bond was stronger than ever. As they examined the machines, Kale felt a thrill of anticipation. The discoveries they would make here could change everything they knew about Zephyria, and perhaps even about the universe. And through it all, he knew that his partnership with Illyra was the key to survival, and perhaps something even greater, understanding between two very different worlds. The frozen valley of Zephyria glimmered in the soft light of the distant sun. Kale, Mercer, and Illyra stood at the edge of the icy cliffs, looking down at the labyrinth of spires, crevices, and snow-covered plains they had navigated together. The planet had tested them in every possible way: storms, predators, and unfamiliar terrain. Yet they had survived. More than that, they had learned from each other. The bond between human and alien had grown into a deep trust and understanding. Kale surveyed the remnants of the ancient machinery they had discovered in the valley. Strange structures of metal and crystal were partially buried in ice, their purpose long forgotten by time. He traced a finger over one of the smooth surfaces, marveling at the complexity. This civilization, they were brilliant, he said softly. I wonder what they learned here that we could use. Illyra stepped closer, her glowing patterns brightening with curiosity. She moved with a grace that made her look almost ethereal, yet her gestures were precise and deliberate. She pointed to a series of symbols etched into the machinery. Kyle studied them, trying to match her interpretations with the sketches they had made together. Slowly, he began to understand a pattern, an ancient system of weather monitoring, perhaps even survival guidance for extreme conditions. Kale realized that humans had a unique skill that even Illyra's species admired: the ability to see patterns, improvise solutions, and combine knowledge from different sources. While Illyra's technology was advanced, it was structured and methodical. Humans, he thought, had a flexibility of thought that allowed them to adapt in ways no purely logical mind could predict. The wind picked up slightly, a gentle reminder that Zephyria was still unpredictable. Kale glanced at Illyra. We should document all of this, he said. Your people might want to see it, and it could help others survive here. Illyra nodded, her glowing patterns pulsing like soft waves across her skin. She seemed to understand not just the words, but the meaning behind them. Survival, cooperation, and knowledge were universal values, transcending species. Suddenly, a faint hum echoed through the valley. Kale's sensors picked it up before he could see the source. Illyra stiffened, her glowing patterns flashing rapidly. Kyle moved closer, instinctively protecting her. From the horizon, a sleek hovering ship appeared, gliding silently over the ice. It was alien, unlike anything Kale had seen before, yet familiar to Illyra. Her patterns brightened, and she gestured urgently for Kale to come forward. The ship landed smoothly on the snow, its hull reflecting the weak sunlight. A hatch opened, and several beings similar to Illyra but taller and more adorned with glowing patterns stepped out. They approached cautiously, their movements deliberate. Kale realized they were Illyra's people, come to retrieve her. He stepped forward, raising his hands in peace. Illyra's companions stopped studying him. For a tense moment it seemed they might consider him a threat, but then their leader made a series of gestures and sounds. Illyra responded with a soft hum, moving beside Kale. The leader's glowing patterns flickered in recognition. They were impressed not just by Illyra's survival, but by Kale's ingenuity, courage, and cooperation. Kale felt a swell of pride. Humans were not physically the strongest nor the most technologically advanced, but in moments like this their creativity, quick thinking, and empathy made them exceptional. Illyra's species may have advanced tools and senses, but humans had something they could admire. Unpredictability combined with purpose. Adaptability combined with understanding. The leader approached Kale, making gestures that Kale interpreted as a form of communication. He mimicked the gestures carefully, explaining through movements and simple sounds that he had helped Illyra survive the storm and navigate the valley. The alien leader observed him closely, then paused. Slowly, the glowing patterns on the leader's body shifted, a signal of respect and approval. Kale smiled quietly. Illyra stepped forward, touching Kale's arm gently. It was a gesture of farewell, but also of gratitude and recognition. Her glowing patterns pulsed softly, and Kale understood that this was her way of saying, "You are a remarkable being, and I will remember you." Kale's chest tightened with emotion. He had expected fear and suspicion from the alien, but instead, they had formed a bond that transcended language, species, and the harshness of Zephyria. The alien companions gestured for Illyra to board their ship. She hesitated, looking back at Kale. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then she touched her chest and pointed to him. A final message. She acknowledged his importance, his ingenuity, and his heart. Kale nodded, understanding fully. As Illyra and her companions ascended into the ship, Kale watched them disappear into the sky. The hum of the engines faded, leaving only the quiet whisper of the wind across the ice. For a moment, Zephyria seemed empty, harsh and cold, yet Kale felt warmth in his chest. He had survived the storms, outwitted predators, and formed a connection that few humans ever could. Turning back to the valley, Kale began documenting everything he had seen. He sketched the machines, mapped the terrain, and wrote notes about Illyra and her species' technology. Every discovery reinforced his belief in humanity's unique strengths. Humans could adapt, cooperate, and improvise. They could survive extreme environments by combining knowledge, creativity, and empathy. The day passed quickly as Kale explored the valley alone. He revisited the predator tracks, the reinforced paths, and the small cave they had used for shelter. He felt a sense of accomplishment, not just for survival, but for understanding. Zephyria had tested him and he had risen to the challenge. But more importantly, he had proven that humans were capable of extraordinary partnership, even with beings who were physically and technologically superior. By evening, Kale returned to his shelter. The walls were battered, the snow piled high against the doors, but inside everything remained intact. He prepared a simple meal, reflecting on the events of the past days. He realized that survival was not just about strength or technology. It was about observation, improvisation, and the ability to learn from others. Illyra had shown him how to see the world differently, and he had shown her the unpredictability and resilience of humans. As night fell on Zephyria, Kale sat by the window, gazing at the frozen horizon. The stars twinkled faintly, reflected on the ice below. He thought about Illyra and her people, and a quiet hope filled him. Perhaps one day humans and Illyra's species could work together, sharing knowledge and exploring the universe as partners. For now, he had learned something just as important. Humans were remarkable not because of physical strength or advanced tools, but because of the mind, the heart, and the spirit that allowed them to survive and thrive against impossible odds. Kale finally lay down. Feeling the warmth of the shelter and the soft hum of the heaters, sleep came slowly, filled with thoughts of the valley, the ancient machines, and the bond he had formed with Illyra. He knew the journey ahead was uncertain, but he was ready. Humanity had survived here in a place that seemed impossible, and he had proof that humans could adapt, learn, and form bonds that even alien species could recognize and respect. As he drifted into sleep, Kale made a silent promise. He would continue exploring, continue learning, and continue proving that humans were capable of extraordinary things. Zephyria was only the beginning. The universe was vast and humanity had only begun to show what it could achieve. And somewhere, far above the icy plains, Elira and her people flew back to their own world, carrying with them a story of a human who had survived the storm, solved problems no alien had considered, and earned a place in their respect and memory. The bond between human and alien would remain, a testament to courage, intelligence, and the extraordinary potential of humanity. In the quiet shelter, Kale smiled. He was not alone, and he had proven something greater than survival. Humans could inspire trust, cooperation, and admiration in a universe full of unknowns. Zephyria had been harsh, the predators fierce, and the storms merciless, but through creativity, empathy, and courage, Kale Mercer had shown the true strength of humankind, and the universe had taken notice.